Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Our jurors and alternates are present. Mr. Durst is present with his lawyers, Mr. Balian and Mr. Millius. Mr. Henderson, Mr. Miata are present. Mr. DeGuerin is present. Mr. Balian, you may resume your argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right. Got my second win. You guys are all in trouble now. So, if Kathy didn't make the phone call to Dean Cooperman, then who did? You know, spoiler alert, I know it's no shock who I'm going to say made the call, right? It's no surprise. We have been our theory all along. What we believe the evidence has proved. And I don't think it's any shock that I'm going to argue that the overwhelming evidence in this case is that Susan Berman made that call. She told many friends she made the call throughout the years. The defendant has now conceded that she was telling everyone that she made that call. And that's where we're at. But let's just, you know, he's saying, well, she said that. She told everyone she made the call, but she was lying, right? That's what he says. So I believe it's necessary for me to go through and explain to you why the evidence has proven that she made the call, even though we all know the overwhelming evidence already shows she made that call. So what can we learn from our knowledge of Susan and the call itself? What does our knowledge of Susan's personality tell us? What would we expect Susan Berman to do? You know, people are kind of creatures of habit. They kind of operate with the same habits and customs, and they're kind of creatures of how they were raised and what was instilled in them from a young age. And what do we know about Susan Berman that tells us a little bit about what we would expect her to do? We know that this was her father. He was a notorious gangster. He was known as Davy the Jew Berman. We know he replaced Bugsy Siegel in running the Flamingo Hilton. That was her father. That's who raised her. We know that she had birthday parties at the Flamingo Hilton where Liberace performed. We know that she'd stay up at night playing cards with her bodyguards. That's how she was raised, at the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas, at the height of this era, by someone who was a member of Murder Incorporated. And she worshiped him. She romanticized her relationship with him based on all the people who knew her. So we can be confident in the testimony of Susan's friends when they said that her sense of loyalty was fierce and ingrained in her, because this is where it came from. Linda Opes, if you recall, you heard from her. She's the producer of movies. She produced many movies that some of us have seen. And when Susan optioned Easy Street, her book, Linda Opes was working with her on the project, and it was a book about Susan's life. And in trying to write this script, Linda Opes sat with Susan for hour upon hour, day upon day, and they discussed Susan's life on a deep level, because that's the business they were involved in, that's the work they were doing. Linda was trying to get into Susan's head to help her develop this script about herself. So they had some very deep discussions. And what did Linda Opes tell you that during these deep discussions she learned about Susan and her sense of loyalty?
Loyalty was everything for Susan. She learned it from her father. It was the mafioso way. If you had a friend who took care of you, you took care of them for life.
That's what loyalty meant to Susan. What did Mella, Susan's, I'm going to call her daughter, because even though they weren't biological mother and daughter. She was more of a mother to Mela than many other people would be to their own children. And what did Mela, who probably knew Susan better than anyone else in this entire world, tell you about Susan and her sense of loyalty?
She was one of the most loyal people I've ever known. Loyalty came first. Loyalty came first with Susan. Maybe right after whatever she felt she had to do to survive, in terms of manipulation. But she was incredibly loyal, and you know, I sort of deduced at one point that you know, that likely came from her morals and her upbringing. I mean, there was a mobster-like loyalty. It wasn't about right or wrong. It was just about loyalty.
So what would we expect Susan Berman to do? I began by asking this question. What would we expect her to do? It wasn't about right or wrong. It was just about loyalty. With Susan, it wouldn't have been, oh my God, there was this accident and your wife is dead, or you killed your wife? No way I'm helping you. That wouldn't have been Susan's response. It would have been, I'm loyal to you till the end. How can I help you out of this situation? That's what it would have been with Susan Berman. That's how she was raised. That's what we know about her from all the people who knew her best. How can I get you, my good friend Bobby, out of this bind? How can I help you? And how would Susan express her loyalty? Susan gave Linda some really good insight into this question.
She said that she watched her mother show her love to her father by keeping his secrets. And she came to understand that that was a big part of love. That if you could protect somebody, if you could protect somebody, if you could be loyal to somebody, and she gave me examples of the way her mother protected her father and kept her secrets, that was love.
If you could protect somebody, if you can keep their secrets, that was love. Right or wrong, good or bad, putting aside what we think of Susan Berman, that's what she was about. That's what she was like. That is the undisputed testimony in this case from the people who knew her, who were raised by her, who worked closely with her and delved into her mind. If you could protect somebody, if you could keep their secrets, that's love. How did Susan handle crisis situations? Some people avoid crises. Some people relish them and run towards them. Between the two of us, if there's a crisis, like one of us is going to be curled up under the desk and one of us is going to be charging in. You guys can figure out which one it is, right? But people are different. How did Susan handle crisis situations?
What was Susan like when a friend had a crisis?
100% committed, there to take over and to fix it.
100% committed, there to fix it. What else did Mela say about this?
I mean, I don't know that she altruistically stepped into roles of service as much as she fixed problems.
Susan, keeping secrets, protecting your friends, that's love. Fixing problems, that's what I do. Crisis situations, I relish them, I jump in. How high up the ladder would she go to solve a problem?
Were there situations in your school ever where Susan got involved in helping you out with issues you had at school?
Absolutely.
And let's say you had an issue at school with Susan and it involved your teacher.
Yeah.
Okay? Would Susan call the teacher? Would she call someone else?
No, she would go straight to the principal and try to get that teacher fired.
She goes straight to the top. She doesn't call the rotation. She's going to call the dean. She goes straight to the top. What would Susan have done for her best friend Bobby? Based on everything we know about her, what would we expect her to do? She loved him, so we know she would have protected him at all costs. She loved him. We know she would have shown that by keeping his secrets. We know she would have relished the challenge to help him by stepping in to help him fix his problems. But we don't have to speculate to answer this question of what would Susan have done to help Bobby. Because the person who probably knew her better than anyone told us what Susan would do to help.
The people closest to Susan, everybody says, even Sarah, that if in that situation, maybe a little bit because of her dad, the whole, mafia thing, that they think that she would have done anything for you.
Damn close.
What would Susan have done for her best friend Bobby? Damn close to anything. That's the fact. That's the evidence. That's the truth. Sure, he wants to come up here and say, oh, Andrew Drecke gave me the hint to say that, which happened to be 5 years earlier because it wasn't even an interview with Mr. Lewin. He spun the wheel and the wrong answer came up. But we know what the truth is based on everything we know about Susan from the people who knew her best, that what he told Andrew Drecke was the truth. Susan absolutely would have done damn close to anything to help her friend Bobby. What does defendant admit Susan actually did to help him? So in evaluating whether she made this call to the dean, it's important to look at what do we know from the evidence that is beyond dispute that she actually did. How involved was she? Well, we know when when his wife went missing, he immediately enlisted her to act as his spokesperson. And what is a spokesperson? A spokesperson is someone who speaks on your behalf, who represents you, who puts forth the narrative that you want. They're acting in your stead. And who is speaking on the defendant's behalf? Who is putting out his message? Who is giving his narrative? Susan Berman. And this was to help find Kathy. What message were they putting out there to help find Kathy? Was Susan really trying to help find Kathy? They immediately began to disparage her, suggesting she had a role in her own disappearance. Detective Struck told you, he interviewed Susan Berman. This is an investigator who's now trying to find your best friend's missing wife. You're speaking to the investigator as a spokesperson. And what are you telling that investigator? Susan told me that Kathy had a cocaine habit. Susan told me that Kathy's also using Quaaludes. This is straight from Detective Struck. I tried not to bore you with too many clips, so I've put them in quotes of what was said. Susan Berman told me that Kathy was flunking out of medical school and had run away. How is any of that designed to help find Susan? Kathy. And that's what Susan is saying to the investigators who are trying to find Kathy. What are they saying publicly? What is Susan saying publicly to the media? We've already gone through them, but just a summary. These are things that both defendant and Susan were telling the media publicly when trying to find Kathy. These are things we learned from Charles Lackman, the reporter, who read his notes of what Susan told him. This is what we heard from Marcia Cranes, who read her notes to you of what was told to her. These are reporters. Kathy's a cocaine addict. Defendant never beat up Kathy. Susan said that. Defendant is flabbergasted at the allegations. Susan said that. Kathy never went to Jacoby. Kathy's flunking out of medical school and must have run away. So what did Susan do as the spokesperson? Was she acting in an endeavor to help find his missing wife? To help him deal with his grief? Or was this a coordinated effort to disparage Kathy so that the police and the public would believe she was a junkie who walked away from her life? Was this a coordinated attack on Kathy so that the police would be distracted and go in a different direction and not look where they should be looking? That's what we know Susan was actually doing. It wasn't about right or wrong. It was just about loyalty. That's who Susan was. Was it to find Kathy? Was that her goal and how she was actually acting? Or was it to help her friend out of this mess? What came first, finding Kathy or loyalty to Bob Durst? You saw the statements that are undisputed she was putting out to both the police and the press. That's what Susan actually did, and we need to remember that when we're deciding, did she make that call? Because actions speak louder than words. I tell my children this all the time, it's your actions that speak louder than your words. And so what were Susan's actions? It's very clear. We started this discussion with the question of who made this call? What would Susan do? What would we expect her to do? And if her friend came to her and said there was an accident and she's dead, or I killed her, or whatever he said to her, what would Susan have done? What would we expect her to do? What do we know about Susan? We know she has a gangster mentality. We know she's fiercely loyal. We know that it's not about right or wrong. We know she shows love by protecting and keeping secrets. We know she relishes taking charge to handle crisis situations. We know she's the fixer. She goes straight to the top to deal with crisis. She would have done damn close to anything to help her best friend, Bobby. We know she actively is pushing a narrative that Kathy's alive and ran away from her life, when we know that's not true. So what would we have expected Susan Berman to do? Quite frankly, any reasonable person looking at this evidence should be shocked and amazed if Susan did anything but make that call. That's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. What did Susan say she did? You were presented more than just what Susan's habits and customs tell you she would do. You were presented with overwhelming evidence that she was telling everybody she made this call. He tried to silence her, but he did not succeed because you heard her words. She spoke to you through her friends. I helped him. I made the call. You heard from multiple people who I had about 100 PowerPoint slides talking about their credibility and why we should believe them. And all those slides got wiped off my computer when he took the stand and he said, Susan was the one telling everybody that I killed Kathy. Susan was the one telling all these people that she called the medical school pretending to be Kathy. The credibility of all these people disappeared because we know from the defendant himself that Susan was saying this to these people. All of them unrelated to each other. None of them, except maybe a couple, maybe Lorraine Newman knew Linda Obst, really knew each other. None of them discussed this case. All gave you the same gist. Susan helped Bobby. She helped him with a false alibi. She helped him out of this jam. She helped him by calling the dean of the medical school, pretending to be Kathy. And here's the moment it happened.
Susan had already told a dozen people, or 15 people, or 18 people, that she had given me an alibi by calling Albert Einstein Medical Center. There was no secret about that.
Well, Mr. Durst, You know that she had told people now, but you didn't know that then, correct?
I knew some of them.
Wait, so you knew before Susan had been murdered that she had told people that you had called Albert Einstein, that she had called Albert Einstein pretending to be Kathy at your request?
I knew that Susan Berman had told people that she telephoned Albert Einstein at my request.
And that's what he testified to. When did he know that Susan was telling this to all these people? When did he know this?
I think Julie said something to me a long, long time before Susan Berman died. Like maybe 5 years before.
Defendant knew for a while, for years, that Susan Berman was out there telling people that he killed his wife, telling people that she called the dean pretending to be Kathy. And the evidence is overwhelming that he killed his wife. But I want you to think about this. Let's assume you don't believe he killed his wife. Let's assume, for whatever reason, you don't believe we've proven he killed his wife. The defendant, by his own testimony, even if he didn't kill Kathy, is terrified of this reinvestigation. He's terrified of big bad Janine Pirro, who apparently he believes can indict a ham sandwich. He knows Susan Berman's out there telling the whole world that he killed his wife and she called the dean. He knows that Detective Becerra is going to get to her and interview her. Whether or not he killed his wife, which the evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates he did, but whether or not he killed his wife, Susan posed a threat to him, to Janine Pirro, who he feared was going to indict him, and he killed her because she was a witness, to silence her, to stop her from ever taking that stand, stop her from ever talking to the police. Now, I'm not suggesting he didn't kill Kathy. I just want to be clear on that. The evidence is overwhelming he killed Kathy. So how does the defendant deal with this issue? Of course, his defense takes a familiar path. Susan lied to all these witnesses, just like Kathy lied to everyone about the injuries I'd done to her. I'll call Susan a liar, just like I called Kathy a liar. Well, let's analyze this. Let's look at a few of these people. I'm not going to go through all of them, just a few of them to analyze this claim that Susan was a liar. Miriam Barnes was Susan's close friend and neighbor at the time of Dean Cooperman. They lived right next door to each other on Beekman Place, if you remember. And Miriam Barnes got summoned up to Susan's apartment out of the blue about an urgent situation that had just happened. I want you to listen to this.
I got the phone call from Susan to come up to her apartment right away.
What exactly did she say when she was summoning you up to her apartment?
She needed to talk to me.
Was there anything out of the ordinary about the way she summoned you up to her apartment?
It was a sense of urgency.
This is something that had just happened. Miriam Barnes is one of the first people Susan called. It was happening in the moment. The conversation was the time when Miriam Barnes learned that Kathy Durst was missing, if you recall the testimony. Susan told Miriam about something, quote, that was happening at that time, in the moment. And what was Susan's demeanor when she spoke with Miriam?
She was, it took her a while to get it out. She was very nervous. And when Susan got nervous, she would pick at her lip. And she said, I did something today and did it for Bobby. And then her next statement was, if anything ever happened to me, Bobby did it.
This had just happened. Miriam called her up about something that she did that day. And Susan was nervous. She's picking on her lip, and she couldn't get the words out. You heard Miriam Barnes. Miriam Barnes didn't lie to you all. If Susan is lying, why is she acting like that with Miriam Barnes? She wasn't. You heard the testimony of Miriam Barnes, who recounted you exactly what happened. Susan was nervous. She was picking at her lip. She had just done something that day, and she related to Miriam what had happened. Plus, she's telling him, if something happens to me, Bobby did it. She's there telling Miriam, you're living proof. If something happens to me, Bobby did it. That's not a lie. That's self-preservation. Who else did we hear from? Susie Harmon. She also related her statement was in the moment, right after this terrible thing had just occurred. You listen to what Susie Harmon told you, and you determine whether Susan Berman was lying to Susie Harmon.
You don't know from where
She
Bob...
called me. He had just called her.
Right, but you don't know where Bob would have heard it from, do you?
What?
You don't know the source that Bob may have been relying on.
It was in the same 24-hour period that it occurred.
I understand, ma'am. But listen, if Bob was being attacked in the press...
How could he be attacked in the press? No one knew that something terrible had happened.
Well, they knew that she was disappeared, didn't they?
No, it had just happened. She called me. Something terrible happened. What can we do? I don't know what I'm going to do.
Right.
That was in the
And
moment.
the terrible...
It was in the moment. It just happened. Something terrible just happened. What are we going to do? What am I going to do? Susan didn't have time to reflect and come up with a lie. She's telling people that day, something horrible happened. I'm conflicted, but I helped my friend Bobby. And if something happens to me, Bobby did it. That was not Susan lying or exaggerating. That was Susan telling the truth about what happened. The last of these women I'm going to discuss is Mella. Okay? And what was her relationship with Susan? They were mother and daughter plus. Mella was like, went everywhere with Susan. Her sidekick. Took her to deals. Took her to meetings with friends. Took her shopping. Bought her things. Drove her to school. They sat and talked on the bed. They talked at the kitchen table. They had a wonderful relationship. Mella was closer to Susan than anyone else you heard from. And you heard from Mella. In evaluating her testimony, you have to remember these two were inseparable. So did Susan lie to Mella? Did Susan lie to Mella? The defendant's position is that Susan lied to everyone, including Mella.
I don't feel like Susan was making up lots of stories. She was not honest. She may have exaggerated or made a story more interesting in her delivery. But it was not necessarily like she was making up stories whole cloth and claiming they were real. That
Okay.
wasn't my experience.
Well, you told us this morning that she was a liar and that she often told people things to either draw them in or to get something she wanted, correct?
Yeah, again, she wasn't really like that with me. I knew all the lies she was telling, and that was very odd for me to be in that situation, to know the truth and stand by her side as she lied to the external world. That wasn't quite our relationship.
Mella was on the inside. She was Susan's buddy. They were close. Mella knew her best. Mella told you, Susan didn't lie to me. Susan lied to other people in front of me, and I was in on the lie. Why would Susan lie to Mella? She didn't. We're going to discuss Nick Chavin a little bit later in my presentation, in my argument. But right now, I want you to ask yourselves, of all the people in the world other than Susan, who was closer to Bob than anyone else? It was this man, Nick Chavin. The three of them were tight. And you've heard from more than one person that if the defendant was going to confide a deep secret with someone other than Susan, it would have been Nick. And here's what Susan told his best friend about whether he killed Kathy. Why would he lie to Nick about this, his best friend? Listen to this and judge for yourself whether Susan was lying to Nick Chavin.
Susan said to me specifically that Bob killed Kathy, and I said no he didn't, and she said yes he did, and we argued about that, and she said, we love both of them, Kathy's gone, we love Bob, we need to protect him. Bob killed Kathy. I said, how do you know? She said, he told me.
This is a man who comes into court and has to tell the world about his best friend killing his other best friend, and how hard that was for him, and what a struggle he had in his own mind. And that's what Susan told him. We love Bobby. We loved Kathy, but Kathy's gone. Now we got to protect Bobby. Why would Susan lie about that? That's not an untruthful statement. That's the truth, and you heard it from Nick Chavin. Susan was not lying. Susan was not lying to these people. She was relating what she had done. And then I always come back to common sense, I know. But I really believe that's the cornerstone of our system of justice and what you as jurors bring to our system of justice. It's the most powerful tool in determining the truth. We know how Susan felt about Robert Durst. We've heard it over and over. She worshiped him. Bless you. She felt giddy when she talked about him. He walked on water for her. That's how he presented in her mind. There are an infinite number of reasons why Susan would lie, exaggerate, alter the truth to make her best friend Bobby look better. There are 0 reasons why Susan would ever utter a single word to make Robert Durst, her best friend Bobby, look bad. And that's just the truth, the reality, common sense. Defendant killed Kathy, and Susan made the call to Dean Cooperman. That's what the overwhelming evidence in this trial before you has proven beyond any reasonable doubt. And with Susan's help, the investigation faded, the case went cold, and defendant almost got away with his role in Kathy's death. Almost. Almost. Because in 1999, by a series of strange events, and someone who was exposing themselves, who was in jail, met with this man, Detective Becerra, and told him he had information on this case, and it piqued his interest, even though it turned out not to be truthful. And he started a reinvestigation. And he started interviewing witnesses, and he started speaking with McCormack family members, and he started speaking with Gilberta. And he started doing forensic examinations and searches of the house. It was too late by then to discover anything. But he reopened the investigation. And unfortunately, when you're searching lakes and searching houses, it's hard to keep it a secret. He tried, but it's hard to keep it a secret. And it went public on November 11th. Missing Durst's wife case reopened after 18 years. And the public learned about this reinvestigation. The defendant knew about this reinvestigation on October 31st, a week or two prior at the least. That's what he said in Galveston, that's what he said here. There's actually evidence he knew earlier because he was structuring money as of October 23rd, but that's neither here nor there. He knew about it as of October 31st, 2000. And what did he do shortly after he found out about this reinvestigation? He sends Susan Berman a check for $25,000. This would not be the only check that the defendant would send to Susan shortly before her murder.
And then, so in November of 2000, did you send her this $25,000? Yeah, I send her, when I've been sending her periodically the $25,000, and I sent her another one when the car broke. I think right within a couple of weeks.
So basically you sent her 50 altogether.
Yes, I sent her two, right, $25,000 check.
Right.
You know, he sends her $50,000. We're going to talk about the significance of that a little later. So I want to put that aside for now. But just remember that. Shortly after this reinvestigation opens, he sends her $50,000. And what was the defendant's reaction to this reinvestigation? Was it relief that it finally be proven that he wasn't responsible? Was it hope that he would find out what happened to his missing wife? Was it hope that they would find her? Or was it something else? This was his trial testimony in Galveston. When you learned about it and got this message from his sister, how did you feel? It just made me sick to my stomach, and I went into the bathroom and threw up. He vomited. He was not thinking about finding his wife. He was thinking about the freedom of one person who'd been running from the truth for many, many years. That's what he was thinking about, and he started to panic. How did it make you feel? Well, it convinced me that I wanted to do was go someplace and hide and not be Robert Durst. He could not be Robert Durst anymore. He could not get caught. He could not face the truth. He had to run from the truth. What was the defendant's reaction to the reinvestigation? Again, he's off. He's running, not just from arrest, not just from prosecution, but from the truth. He's running. He's run and he ran and he hid. He could not be Robert Durst in Galveston. He stopped using his credit cards. He stopped using his cell phone. He made his way to Galveston and rented this small one-bedroom apartment. This very wealthy man, I don't know, I said earlier that, he had $100 million. I take that back. I don't know if that's true or not, but we know from the evidence he's a very wealthy man. And he's renting this one-bedroom apartment, disguising himself as a woman, pretending to be mute. What does his level of desperation tell us? Imagine the lengths he went through not to be caught. He moved to another state. He lived in a cheap one-bedroom, or inexpensive, I shouldn't call it cheap, one-bedroom apartment. He pretended to be a mute woman. He abandoned the financial system and started structuring money. He structured hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash. He pretended to be Dorothy Siner and then Diane Wynn in New Orleans to get a second place in case he had to flee the place in Galveston. He set up a second place to flee in New Orleans. When he got tired of being a woman, he became Jim Cordes. That's what he initially told Morris Black. When he had to travel to New York City, he rode a 36-hour bus ride so that he didn't have to show ID, which might connect his name to where he was in Galveston. This is hard. It's an abandonment of your life. It's not easy. Do you do that to hide from a reinvestigation which is false? Or do you do that to run from what you know is true and you cannot get caught at all costs? What else did he do? He dismembers a body. Imagine what that takes. He was so desperate not to get caught by this reinvestigation that he dismembers a body. Yet he wants you to think that during the same period of time that he's in Galveston, where he stopped using his credit cards, where he's taking 36-hour bus rides, where he's dismembering a corpse not to get caught, during that same period of time, he's going to just take a staycation in Los Angeles during that same period of time and go to Disneyland and Catalina Island and Century City? That's what he's trying to sell you? This level of desperation, this man, this is the time period, and he's going to go to Los Angeles and board a plane For fun? No. He did it because he had to. He had no choice. It was her or me. He was willing to take that risk to get on that plane because it was about to go down on him. Why was Morris really killed? The defendant let the truth slip. Morris knew that Dorothy Siner was the defendant, who he was. I'm sorry. The defendant knew that Morris Black knew that the defendant was living next door to him as a woman, Dorothy Siner. Morris knew this. Morris knew that he was hiding from something. Morris knew eventually that he was Robert Durst. Morris knew that Robert Durst was living in that apartment dressed as a woman, pretending to be mute. Morris knew how desperate the defendant was not to get caught. What else did Morris know? The truth slipped.
In other words, not wanting to be you, not wanting to be Bob Durst. Did you explain to him why you didn't want to be Bob Durst?
Primarily because of Janine Pirro.
Primarily because of Janine Pirro. He let the truth slip. Morris knew about Janine Pirro. He tried to take it back on cross-examination later. I think the next day he tried to say, well, I only told the name Janine Pirro. I didn't say anything about the reinvestigation. Think about it. This is the man who's so paranoid that everyone is following what he's done. He's worried that the pilot on the flight from Eureka, who knows him, if you remember this testimony from Galveston, he's worried that the pilot knows him. And he's worried that the pilot read about him and has learned all about the reinvestigation and has shunned him. He's that paranoid about himself and what people know. He's worried that the neighbor that he visits in New York won't let their kid play with him because they've read about him and they know all about him. He's that paranoid. He's paranoid that he testifies in Galveston that this architect he was supposed to visit shunned him and must have known what was going on, so that meeting never happened. He's paranoid about all this stuff. He's so focused about all this stuff. He reads every media account about himself, yet he wants you to believe that he didn't fear, just because he only mentioned the name Janine Pirro, that Morris Black wouldn't have looked up who Janine Pirro was, who Robert Durst was. And so Robert Durst killed Morris Black and he dismembered his body. That's how desperate he was not to get caught. And it's hard to dismember a body. It takes hours. It takes determination. It takes planning and proper tools. It takes sweat. It takes physical exhaustion. You heard from the coroner, it takes him an hour to do it, and he's an expert. With the power saw, with the bow saw, back and forth, over and over, repeatedly, trying to get through that dense bone. It causes blisters on your thumbs. Oh, they'd like you, the defendant would like you to believe that that was caused by getting caught in the slide of the 22. That was what was presented to you in opening statement, but remember, what the attorneys say is not evidence. The actual evidence in the case, when the defendant was handed this 22 and asked on the stand if that's how he got the blister, he said, I don't think so. If you remember that. That evidence turned out not to be presented. Just like the defense in opening statement told you you would hear evidence explaining a lot of this conduct. You'd hear experts telling you about Asperger's. And the expert would explain to you how that affects him and how he acts and what he does. Remember, the statements in opening statement are not evidence. There's been no evidence presented to you whatsoever in this case by any expert on Asperger's or autism or anything else involving those issues. Remember to focus on the evidence that was presented to you, not what was told that would be presented to you. So, what does defendant's level of desperation tell us? It was Morris or me. I had no choice. He goes back to his playbook and he opens it up and he adds a new item to this list. When I'm trying to get away with murder, I also need to eliminate the witnesses. And so Morris has got to go. So Morris knows who I am. Morris knows where I live. Morris knows about the reinvestigation and what I'm hiding from. And so Morris has to go. What other loose ends does he need to tie up? Who else posed a huge problem to the defendant in the case against Kathleen Durst?
Do you know of any person on this earth who was more concerned with being an advocate for finding Kathy Durst other than your sister Gilberta?
At that point in time, no.
Do you know of anyone who was a stronger voice to law enforcement at that time in trying to find Kathy Durst?
At that time, no.
No one was a bigger advocate for the truth when it came to finding out what happened to Kathy than Gilberta Najami. But the important question for you is, did the defendant himself know that Gilberta posed a threat?
During the 6 weeks that I was on the run, before being arrested in Pennsylvania, it would be correct that Gilberta Najami and Janine Pirro were a threat.
Those were his words. He knew Gilberta was a threat. And so what does he do? He's got her address in his car during this period of time when he knows she's a threat and he's on the run. He has her phone number. He has a map to the county where she lives, which would lead him right to that address. He's got not one, but 2 guns. 2. Along with that note, he's got 80 rounds of ammunition. He wants you to believe that was to commit suicide? Come on, use your common sense. 80 rounds of ammunition, he'd be a really bad shot. He's trying to shoot himself in the head. Because he read some article in the New Yorker about how sometimes people don't succeed on their first try. Well, I better bring 2 guns. I better bring more rounds of ammunition. Same excuse he gives in New Orleans when he's caught with this gun. And this mask, it was to commit suicide. Maybe he was going to smother his face with it. Suffocate himself. Use your common sense. It was anybody who stands between me and the truth. I had no choice. That's who the defendant is. What did the defendant say about that note he had for Gilberta in his car?
Did you have this address of Gilberta Najami's?
No.
No, I didn't have that address. Flat out lie. He stipulated that was in his car. He flat out lied to you. Why does he have that address? But more importantly, why is he lying about having that address? Then he takes the stand here and tells you, I didn't know her address. That wasn't the address. Wrong. You heard from Fadwa. That was the address. It was Gilberta or me. I had no choice. He had the atlas. He had the guns. He had the ammunition. He had a backup gun. It was Gilberta or me. I had no choice. He's back to his playbook. He's eliminating witnesses. Fortunately for Gilberta, he will stop before he can succeed. I'm going to take a rest now, and Mr. Millius is going to explain to you some things about Galveston and what we learned from the Galveston case. And I've appreciated your patience that you've extended to me so far. I really do. And thank you very much. Mr. Millius?
Mr. Millius got a really crummy time slotted for you. No, that's fine. It's good.
All right, guys. I'm going to talk to you about Galveston, but I'm going to start at the end, or towards the end. I'm going to start at the point, as you can see in the image, after Morris has already been murdered. And at this point, it's September 28th. Morris is dead. His body is in the apartment. And Durst is executing his plan to get away with this murder. And what does he do? First thing he does is he gathers all the clothes and belongings of Morris and he throws them away. Then he makes his way over to the bank and he gets a cashier's check, money order, and pays the rent of Morris. And the whole idea here of the plan is to make it seem as if Morris is still alive, even though he's dead in his apartment. And the whole idea is basically to say Morris paid his rent, moved out, and then basically disappeared off the face of the earth. And if that sounds familiar to you, it should. Because basically, that's the plan he used with Kathy. Now, after he had paid the rent check, went back, cut up the body, put it into bags, put it into his car, and drove out to a pier like this pier. He walked out there with the bags, Morris's body, and obviously the intent there was to drop those bags into the water and have them never appear on the face of the earth again, to disappear forever, just like Kathy. He didn't understand the tide and the depth, didn't understand that the body would be washed back up onto the shore. But I want you to take a moment right now, and I want you to think about an alternate world, an alternate reality. A world where you walk to the end of that pier, and you have those body parts, and you throw them out onto them, and it disappears off the face of the earth. You will never see it again. I want you to imagine that in that scenario, Durst throws those body parts there, and they're never seen again. This makes us think, well, then what would the consequences later on be? What would the consequences be in the Galveston trial? What would the consequences be here? And I think that it goes without saying, it's an absolute certainty that the story that you would have heard wouldn't have had anything to do with a struggle over a gun, wouldn't have had anything to do with shooting in an apartment, it wouldn't have had anything to do with self-defense or accident. None of those things you would have heard. Those are the things I'm going to talk about probably the next 45 minutes or tomorrow for 45 minutes. The story, though, that you will hear, or the story you would have heard if that scenario was true, that that body disappeared and was never found again, everybody knows that the story the defense would have said is Bob did not kill Morris and he doesn't know who did. Because that's what the plan was. And think about that. The story that you would have been told, the story that the Galveston jury would have been told, would have been a lie. But that's not what happened. That body, Morris's body, with the tide, washed back up the shore, and Durst standing there saw those body parts coming, and he knew the truth came up, and that lie, the lie that he would have told you, wasn't going to work anymore. And he had to substitute that lie for a different lie. See, with Durst, there's really the lie he's telling now and the lie he's telling later to cover up for the lie that originally he told that failed. I want to jump a little forward in the story. Several days later, Durst is arrested in Galveston for the murder of Morris Black. Because ultimately the body is found, Morris's body is found, the apartment is searched, everything ties back to him, and he's arrested. And he posts bail. And after he posts bail, he walks out of the jail knowing that there's a trial pending. And in that trial, there's going to be the issue of how does he address this amount of evidence that he was going to confront in the trial. And this is how he described that problem. Which, of course, with no sound, is a problem. No, I have it on the other speaker. No, hold on. There we go.
Sorry, I have to help Mr. Millius with technical issues.
We know how that went last time.
Okay, let's try now.
What was the strategy? What was the basic idea of how you were going to get off in Galveston, if you were?
How I was going to get acquitted, what my story was going to be, what my case was going to be. The best case was immediately, I mean, the other lawyers who came to see me, Mike Kennedy was...
Wait, I skipped ahead, sorry, guys. When the audio didn't work, I skipped one slide.
No way, I'm not going to stay here and face murder charges and an unwinnable murder case like the... I mean, especially, they got me on my neighbor being shot in the face with my gun in my apartment, which I rented, disguised as a woman, and I dismembered the guy's corpse. Who's going to acquit me? I'm obviously guilty in front of the eyes of the world. I'm guilty. I ain't coming back here. I'm never going to see this place again.
Okay, that's in 2010, how he describes his feelings upon exiting the jail and thinking about the prospects of the trial. And his solution to that problem that he's facing is to say basically this: I can't win that, I'm leaving. I'm gonna run. And he went on the run. He was ultimately arrested, and he came back, he was extradited, brought back to Texas, where he would stand trial for Galveston, for the murder of Morris Black. And he still had that problem. So the question is, what was the solution to that problem? And this is what he says.
What was the strategy? What was the basic idea of how you were going to get off in Galveston, if you were?
How I was going to get acquitted, what my story was going to be, what my case was going to be. The best case was immediately, I mean, the other lawyers who came to see me, Mike Kennedy was a well-known New York criminal lawyer. He was sure I had to plead temporary insanity. My sister was still there for me. She was standing up for me, and she brought in Mike Ramsey, who brought in Dick DeGuerin. Mike Ramsey was a real pain. He was sure I had to plead temporary insanity. They're never going to believe your story. You have to be insane. Only insane people dismember corpses anyway. But I came to meet the other lawyers. The lawyers were calling, lots of lawyers, big case. Lots of lawyers wanted to take it. And Dick and Mike, Dick DeGuerin and Mike Ramsey knew what Mike Kennedy did not know, because Mike Kennedy's a New York lawyer, they were Texas lawyers, that self-defense is a very viable plea in the state of Texas. In the state of Texas, you find somebody in your house who's not supposed to be there. There's not much you cannot do to them.
Okay, so from this clip we gathered, he has a proposed solution. And the solution is self-defense. But there's an additional thing you can get from this clip. And clips like this is basically the way that he describes, when he's asked generally what happened in Galveston. And he never describes Galveston in a way that somebody would if they were actually, there was a threat. Like, this guy was a threat to me, and I had to use some force, and then accidentally the gun went off, right? Like, it's a travesty this happened, right? That's not how he describes it. There are a number of clips you've heard throughout the trial, and every description that he uses, unless he's asked to go through step by step the facts, but when he describes generally the problem, the way he describes it is basically gaming how you win. He does not describe it as most people would in that situation. Now I want to talk to you about the proposed solution that he had. The proposed solution is self-defense. And there's some advantages for him to use self-defense. One, he destroyed the crime scene. He cleaned it up so that forensic evidence that could be there that points to a different conclusion, he got rid of it. He destroyed some of the forensic evidence as well by taking the body and removing it. He destroyed some of the forensic evidence as well by taking the head, and we have never recovered the head. So you can't really tell what happened by just the head, right? It's gone. There's also an advantage to self-defense claim. In this particular situation, no one else was there. No one else can say, oh, this happened or didn't happen, because he was the only witness. But that's also, while it's a strength for him in theory, it's also a weakness. Because the only one that says anything about this what happened in Galveston, is Robert Durst. And if you don't believe Robert Durst, his entire story falls apart. And it is about that time, and I will talk to you tomorrow morning. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're breaking for the evening until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. Don't talk about the case, any of the people, or any subject involved in it with anyone, including the other jurors. Do not make up your mind about the verdict or any issue until after you've discussed the case with the other jurors during deliberations. Have a good evening. See you tomorrow.
On September 13th, 2019, and on October 24th, 2019, I sent lengthy emails to the defense relating to this pre-arrest due process delay issue. I also lodged them with the court afterward. I did this because the letters reflected the years-long offer that had been made regarding stipulations. Because they are lodged, I just want to make sure that they remain a part of the court record. And I understand the court, in making its rulings and in discussing this issue, although I've addressed the point that the people actually offered, the defense had the opportunity to have the evidence they wanted admitted for the truth of the matter asserted, and they chose for tactical reasons not to do so. I don't recall the court, I know the court's listening to that, I don't recall the court ever commenting on that point, but it would seem to us to be a very significant point with respect to the arguments the defense has made.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lewin. Any comment from the defense on that?
Oh,
it's yes. I find it persuasive, but I don't think I even need to address it in order to rule as I have. It's strictly evidentiary matter. The ruling is sound, but it adds a dimension to it. Certainly, if there is some idea of waiver with regard to any due process claim, surely your argument does address that.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Department 1 is adjourned.